My best friend's uncle taught us poker. Then he said, "Real players bet with clothes." And everyone laughed. The cards hit the table, and Uncle Rick grinned at the six of us crowded around his basement setup. "You boys are getting pretty good at this. You know what real players do when the stakes get boring? They bet with clothes. Strip poker. Makes it interesting." The room went silent for maybe 2 seconds. Then Danny laughed, that nervous, high-pitched sound, and suddenly everyone was laughing. Even me, though my face felt hot and something in my chest tightened like a fist closing around my lungs. Uncle Rick was still grinning, watching us, waiting to see what we'd do. I was 12, the youngest kid there, spending the weekend at my best friend Danny's house, and this was supposed to be the cool part of the sleepover. Danny's uncle visiting from Atlantic City, teaching us real poker, treating us like adults instead of kids. "Come on, I'm just messing with you, unless you're not too chicken." He winked, shuffled the deck again with those smooth dealer hands. "Nah, we'll keep it friendly tonight, but you boys should know that's how the real games go. Nothing to be ashamed of, it's just cards." He dealt another hand, and everyone picked up their cards, but I couldn't stop staring at him, the way he'd said it so casually, the way his eyes had moved across all of us when the words left his mouth, lingering just a second too long on each boy's face. Something was wrong. I knew it in my bones, the same way you know not to touch a hot stove, but I didn't have words for it yet. Didn't know how to articulate why a joke about strip poker from a trusted adult made my stomach turn over. We played for another hour, just regular poker with plastic chips, and Uncle Rick told stories about casino dealers and high rollers in Atlantic City like he was letting us in on secret adult knowledge. By the time we went upstairs to sleep in Danny's room, everyone else seemed fine, already laughing about other stuff, but I lay awake in my sleeping bag on the floor staring at the ceiling. I kept hearing that comment on loop in my head. Real players bet with clothes. And everyone laughed. We'd all laughed because we didn't know what else to do when an adult said something that made us uncomfortable but framed it as a joke. The laughter had given him permission, told him we were the kind of kids who wouldn't report things, who'd stay quiet to seem cool. I didn't tell my parents when they picked me up Sunday afternoon. What would I even say? Danny's uncle made a joke about strip poker? They'd probably laugh too, tell me boys joke around, that I was being too sensitive. My dad made crude jokes all the time. This was probably just another one of those things adults did that made kids uncomfortable but wasn't actually wrong. Except it felt wrong. It felt like a test, like Uncle Rick had been checking to see which boys would laugh and which would object, measuring us for something. I pushed it down, tried to forget it, but the unease stayed lodged in my chest. Danny and I stayed best friends through 6th grade and into 7th. We didn't talk about that night, didn't mention Uncle Rick except when Danny would say his uncle was visiting again and did I want to come over. I always made excuses, had homework, family plans, anything to avoid being in that basement again. Then in March of 7th grade, Danny started acting different. He got quiet in class, stopped raising his hand, stopped cracking jokes during lunch. His grades dropped from A's to C's, seemingly overnight. Teachers noticed but chalked it up to normal teenage stuff, maybe girl problems or friend drama. I asked him a few times if he was okay, and he always said fine, then changed the subject fast, like I'd touched a bruise. One Friday night, his mom called my mom and asked if I could sleep over, said Danny had been asking for me specifically and seemed down lately, thought having his best friend around might cheer him up. My mom said yes before I could object. I showed up at Danny's house that evening with my overnight bag, feeling uneasy, but not sure why. Danny seemed almost normal at first, playing video games, talking about the basketball game at school, but there was something brittle about it, something forced. Then around 9 o'clock, he got a text, and his whole body went rigid. The controller fell from his hands. "Uncle Rick's here, he brought cards." The words came out flat, dead, and suddenly I understood everything. My stomach dropped through the floor. I followed Danny downstairs to the basement where that same card table was set up, Uncle Rick already shuffling a deck with that same easy grin. 2 of Danny's cousins were there, 14-year-old Austin and 13-year-old Kyle, both looking uncomfortable but trying to act cool. Uncle Rick greeted me with enthusiasm, clapped me on the shoulder. "There he is. Thought you'd forgotten about us, man. Come on, let's see if you remember what I taught you." We played poker for an hour, and it was normal at first, just chips and cards. Uncle Rick told his casino stories, dealt hands, complimented our plays. I started to relax slightly, thinking maybe I'd built it up in my head over the past year. Maybe that comment really had been just a joke and nothing more. Then Uncle Rick stretched, checked his watch, looked at the 5 of us sitting around the table. "Getting late. You boys tired yet?" We all shook our heads, teenagers trying to prove we could hang with an adult, and he smiled. "Good, because I think it's time we played a real game, like I mentioned last time. Higher stakes. You're all older now, practically men. Time to learn how the real world works." He started dealing again, but this time his voice was different, lower, more serious. The joking tone was gone. "Here's the rule. Each hand you lose, you take something off. Socks, shirt, whatever. It's not sexual, it's just stakes. It's psychology. You learn to play under pressure, learn to bluff when you're vulnerable. This is how professional players train themselves. I learned this method from guys who play in the World Series of Poker. Austin laughed uncertainly. You're joking, right? Uncle Rick's face stayed completely serious. Do I look like I'm joking? You want to be treated like kids? Go upstairs and watch cartoons? You want to learn real poker? You play by real rules. This is how men bond. This is how you build confidence. The silence stretched out, suffocating. I looked at Danny, expecting him to laugh it off, to tell his uncle we weren't interested, to shut this down. But Danny was staring at the table, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles went white. He looked terrified, but he wasn't saying no. Nobody was saying no. We were all frozen, 12 and 13, and 14-year-old boys caught between not wanting to seem childish and knowing something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Uncle Rick dealt the cards. First hand is free. After that, losers start stripping. Come on, it's not a big deal. You've all been in locker rooms before. You've all changed for gym class. This is the same thing, just with cards. Don't make it weird. That phrase landed like a slap. Don't make it weird. He was putting the responsibility on us, making it seem like our discomfort was the problem, not what he was asking us to do. Making us complicit in our own exploitation. I picked up my cards, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I looked at Danny again, silently begging him to shut this down. But Danny picked up his cards too, his face pale as paper, his eyes empty. We played the hand. Austin lost. Uncle Rick looked at him expectantly, waiting. Socks or shirt? Your choice, champ. Austin pulled off his socks, threw them on the floor, trying to look casual about it, but his face was burning red and his hands trembled. Uncle Rick dealt again, like nothing unusual was happening. The next hand, Kyle lost and pulled off his shoes. The third hand, I lost. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, taste copper in my mouth. I pulled off my socks, my mind screaming that this was wrong, this was so wrong, but the words stayed trapped inside. Why didn't I say it out loud? Why didn't any of us just stand up and leave? Uncle Rick kept dealing, kept talking, his voice smooth and steady. He won most hands, keeping himself fully clothed while piece by piece we removed our clothing. Shoes, socks, shirts. He narrated the whole time, normalizing it with stories about poker games in college, in the military, in casinos. This is just how men bond when they're really testing each other. This is how you learn real confidence, real emotional control. If you can play poker in your underwear without flinching, you can negotiate business deals, you can talk to girls, you can handle any pressure life throws at you. I'm teaching you something valuable here. His voice was hypnotic, reasonable, and part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe this was normal, and I was just inexperienced. Just a kid who didn't understand how the adult world worked. But another part of me, deeper and older, was screaming danger. After maybe 6 hands, most of us were down to pants and underwear. The basement air felt thick and wrong, pressing down on us. I couldn't look at the other boys, couldn't look at Uncle Rick. I stared at my cards, my skin crawling with wrongness, my brain screaming run but my body frozen in place. That's when Danny stood up, just pushed back from the table hard enough that his chair scraped against the concrete floor, grabbed his shirt, pulled it on. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his arms through the sleeves. I don't want to play anymore. His voice cracked, but he said it. He finally said it. Uncle Rick's expression changed for just a second, the friendly mask slipping to show something cold and angry underneath. Then he rearranged his face into a smile, held up his hands in mock surrender. Okay. Sensitive tonight, huh, Danny? That's fine. No pressure. Game's over, boys. You all did good, though. Got further than most adults would, honestly. You should be proud. He started collecting the cards, casual as anything, while we all scrambled to get dressed, not looking at each other, humiliation and relief and confusion churning together into something toxic. I pulled my shirt on so fast I got it backwards, had to fix it with shaking hands. This stays between us, right? Uncle Rick's voice cut through the scrambling. We all froze. Your parents wouldn't understand this kind of training. They'd think it was weird, but we know it's not. It's just cards, just psychology. Nothing inappropriate happened here. Everyone's fine. We're just a group of guys playing poker, learning about pressure and stakes. That's all anyone needs to know. We all nodded, desperate to believe him, desperate for this to be over and forgotten. Uncle Rick packed up his cards, ruffled Danny's hair as he passed, heading upstairs. Good game, boys. We'll try again next month when everyone's feeling braver. We heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him talking to Danny's mom in the kitchen above us, his voice cheerful and normal, asking about her week and complimenting her cooking. The 5 of us stood in that basement, fully dressed again, but feeling more exposed than when we'd been half naked. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at each other. We'd all just participated in something that felt like violation, even though Uncle Rick hadn't touched us, hadn't forced us, had just pressured and manipulated until we complied. That night, after everyone else fell asleep, I lay in the dark of Danny's room and whispered his name. He whispered back that he was awake. I asked him if his uncle had done that before, the strip poker thing. The silence stretched so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Yeah, 3 times before tonight. Just me and Austin and Kyle. It went further each time. This was the first time he invited someone outside the family. I asked my mom if you could come because I thought maybe if you were there, he wouldn't do it. Or if he did, you'd see it and I wouldn't be alone in knowing it was wrong. The words gutted me. Danny had brought me into this hoping I'd be a shield or a witness, and instead I'd just frozen and participated. Why didn't you tell your parents? He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I tried once. Mentioned that Uncle Rick was teaching us poker, and my mom said, wasn't that nice of him, spending time with us boys. She loves him. He's her little brother. If I tell her what he's really doing, she won't believe me. She'll say I misunderstood or I'm exaggerating. I wanted to tell him to try anyway, to tell someone who'd listen, to report it. But I was 12 years old, lying in the dark, scared and confused and not sure what reporting would even mean or who would believe us. Instead, I told Danny I wouldn't come over anymore when his uncle was around. He asked me not to tell anyone, said it would make everything worse, create drama, make people think he was a liar or a troublemaker. I promised, and the promise felt like betrayal, even as I made it. The next Monday at school, I couldn't focus on anything. Teachers called on me and I had no idea what they'd asked. I kept seeing Uncle Rick's face, kept hearing him say, "Don't make it weird," kept feeling the shame of sitting at that table removing my clothes because an adult told me to, and I was too afraid to refuse. During lunch, I went to the bathroom and threw up, my body finally rejecting what my mind hadn't been able to process. I went to the school counselor's office during last period, told the secretary I needed to talk to someone. Mrs. Phillips, the counselor, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray hair. She invited me into her office, closed the door, sat down across from me. "What's going on?" I told her I needed to talk about something that happened, but I'd promised my friend I wouldn't tell anyone. She said some promises shouldn't be kept, especially if someone was being hurt or in danger. So I told her everything. The comment from a year ago about real players betting with clothes, everyone laughing, the strip poker game on Friday night, the way Uncle Rick had made it seem normal and professional, the way none of us had known how to refuse, the way Danny had finally stopped it but only after we were all half naked. Mrs. Phillips listened without interrupting, her expression getting progressively more serious, her hands clasped tight on her desk. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What you just described is sexual abuse. That man manipulated and exploited you and those other boys. What he did was criminal. I'm mandated by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police. You did the right thing telling me." My stomach dropped. Does Danny have to know it was me? She studied my face with compassion. "The investigation will probably make it obvious, but I'll do my best to keep your name out of the initial report. Would you be willing to talk to police if they want a statement?" I nodded, even though my hands started shaking again. 2 days later, a detective came to school, pulled me out of math class, sat with me and Mrs. Phillips in a conference room, and took my statement. Detective Simmons was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that got progressively angrier as I talked, though her voice stayed gentle. She asked specific questions. Had Uncle Rick touched me inappropriately? No. Had he taken photographs during the game? Not that I saw. Had he exposed himself? No. Had he threatened us or physically forced us to remove clothing? No. He just pressured us and made refusing seem childish. Detective Simmons explained that what Uncle Rick had done was still sexual abuse, something called grooming and exploitation of minors. Even without touching, coercing children to remove clothing in a sexualized context was criminal. The strip poker setup, the normalization, the manipulation, all constituted abuse designed to desensitize us to boundary violations. She said they'd be interviewing Danny and his cousins, likely that same day, and that I shouldn't discuss the case with anyone to avoid interfering with the investigation. That afternoon, Danny was pulled out of class. So were Austin and Kyle. By the time school ended, rumors were spreading. Something about Danny's family, police, abuse. Kids were speculating wildly, making up stories, assuming the worst things. Danny texted me that night, just one message. "They know everything. They're asking about Uncle Rick. Was it you who told?" I stared at that text for an hour and couldn't make myself respond. Couldn't admit it and couldn't lie about it. The next day, Danny wasn't at school. Neither were his cousins. I sat through classes feeling sick, wondering if I'd made everything worse, if Danny would ever forgive me, if I'd just destroyed my best friend's life by trying to help him. Mrs. Phillips pulled me aside between periods, told me that Danny and his cousins had confirmed everything in their interviews, that additional victims had been identified going back several years, that Uncle Rick had been arrested that morning. She said I'd potentially saved multiple children from escalating abuse. I asked if Danny hated me now. She said he was probably confused and scared and processing trauma, but that eventually he'd understand I'd done this because I cared about him, not to hurt him. Uncle Rick's arrest made the local news that evening. My parents sat me down after dinner, their faces serious. They'd gotten a call from Detective Simmons explaining my involvement in the case. My dad looked like he wanted to throw up. My mom couldn't stop crying and hugging me, apologizing for letting me sleep over there, for not seeing warning signs, for not protecting me. The news article was brief. Local casino dealer arrested for child sexual abuse. Multiple victims. Ongoing investigation, charges including endangering the welfare of children and sexual exploitation of minors. It didn't name any of us, but in a town this size, everyone knew. Everyone knew it was Danny's uncle. Everyone could guess who the victims were. At school the next week, the whispers followed me everywhere. Kids asked if it was true, what had happened exactly, how far it had gone. Some treated me with pity I didn't want, like I was broken. Others treated me like a snitch, like I'd gotten someone arrested over nothing. One kid, an 8th grader named Brad, cornered me by the lockers. Strip poker isn't even a big deal. My older brother plays it at college parties all the time. You ruined that guy's life over a game. I hit him. Didn't think about it, just swung, connected with his jaw. We both got dragged to the principal's office. I got suspended for 3 days. Brad got suspended for 1 day for harassment. My dad picked me up from school, and instead of being angry about the suspension, he took me for ice cream. That kid deserved it. I'm proud of you for standing up. But next time, use your words first. I couldn't explain that words felt useless, that everyone kept minimizing what happened, calling it just a game, just a joke, acting like I was overreacting. The punch had felt like the only language people understood. Danny didn't contact me for 2 weeks. Then, one evening, he showed up at my door unannounced, his mom's car idling in the driveway. He stood on my porch, not making eye contact, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. I know it was you who told. My mom figured it out, asked me if you were there that night, if you knew what happened. I waited for him to yell, to tell me I'd betrayed him, to say we weren't friends anymore. My chest felt tight, bracing for impact. Instead, Danny said, "Thank you." His voice cracked. I couldn't do it myself. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't. Every time he came over, I told myself I'd say no this time. But then he'd start dealing cards and talking, and I'd just freeze. You did what I couldn't. You saved me. Then he hugged me, quick and awkward, and walked back to the car before I could respond. His mom was crying in the driver's seat, waved at me, mouthed, "Thank you." They drove away, and I stood on the porch in the cold, feeling something loosen in my chest for the first time in weeks. The investigation expanded rapidly. Turned out Uncle Rick had been doing this for years, rotating through different groups of boys, Danny and his cousins just the most recent targets. Detectives found online chat logs where Uncle Rick discussed grooming techniques with other predators, shared advice on how to normalize sexual situations with children, how to make them feel complicit so they wouldn't report. Phrases like "start with jokes to test boundaries and make them laugh so they associate it with fun" appeared repeatedly. They found hundreds of photographs on his computer, not of the poker games, but of boys at the beach, at pools, in locker rooms, candid shots taken without consent over several years. Some of the boys were identifiable. Their parents were contacted. The case exploded. The prosecutor's office called my parents in April, said I might need to testify if the case went to trial. My dad's face went pale when he told me, "You don't have to if you don't want to. But they think your testimony about the grooming progression, the initial comment, and then the actual strip poker could be important. It shows pattern and intent." I said I'd do it. I wanted to. Wanted to stand in front of a courtroom and say what happened, make people understand it wasn't just a game, wasn't harmless, that it had terrified me and violated something fundamental. But in May, Uncle Rick's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Rick would plead guilty to multiple counts of endangering the welfare of children and attempted sexual exploitation in exchange for avoiding trial. The prosecutor explained to my parents that trials are traumatic for child victims, that cross-examination can be brutal, that the plea guaranteed a conviction without putting us through that. Uncle Rick got 8 years in prison and lifetime registration as a sex offender. 8 years for grooming dozens of boys over more than a decade, for the online network, for the photographs, for everything. The sentence was announced on a Tuesday in June. I sat in my room that afternoon feeling hollow. Part of me had wanted the trial, wanted the chance to testify, to make him hear what he'd done to us. Instead, he got a deal. Got to avoid detailed public testimony, got to serve time and eventually walk free while we carried this forever. Danny's family imploded over the summer. His mom filed for divorce from his dad, blamed him for bringing Uncle Rick around their son, even though she'd encouraged it just as much. Danny and his dad moved to an apartment across town. His cousins' families stopped talking to them, angry about the scandal, about the media attention, about having to explain to neighbors that their family member was a child predator. Danny changed schools for 8th grade, couldn't handle the rumors and the stares at our school. We texted for a while, but it faded gradually. He needed distance from everything connected to that time, and I was connected. I understood. Didn't make it hurt less, but I understood. I started 8th grade as the kid who'd gotten someone arrested. Some teachers treated me extra gently, asking too often if I was okay, if I needed anything. Other kids avoided me entirely, like trauma was contagious or I'd report them for something too. I went to mandatory counseling with a therapist named Dr. Hayes who specialized in childhood sexual abuse. She had an office with comfortable chairs and paintings of forests on the walls. She helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that freezing during the strip poker was a normal trauma response, that telling Mrs. Phillips had been brave. She also helped me process the anger that kept bubbling up at random times. I was angry at Uncle Rick, obviously, but also angry at Danny's mom for being so blind to who her brother really was, angry at Danny for not stopping it sooner, angry at the other boys for laughing that first night, angry at my parents for not noticing something was wrong after that first sleepover, angry at myself for every moment I'd stayed silent. The anger was a living thing inside me, hot and acidic. Dr. Hayes taught me that anger was just fear and hurt wearing a different mask, that underneath I was scared and violated and grieving the innocence I'd lost. She taught me breathing techniques for when the anger felt overwhelming, taught me to identify triggers before I reacted violently. High school started and I tried to reinvent myself. Joined the wrestling team, threw myself into the physical exhaustion of practice, the clear rules of competition. Started getting serious about grades, anything to be known for something other than that case, other than being a victim. It mostly worked. New students didn't know the history. Freshmen hadn't been at our middle school during the scandal, but every time someone suggested a poker night at a party or a sleepover, my stomach would turn over. I couldn't touch playing cards without seeing Uncle Rick's hands dealing, hearing his voice saying real players bet with clothes. I made excuses, said I didn't know how to play or wasn't interested, and people stopped inviting me. Sophomore year, I got paired with a new student named Lucas for a biology project. We were working in the library one afternoon when he mentioned his old school 2 towns over had a scandal a few years back. Teacher arrested for abuse. Whole community torn apart. He said it quietly, carefully, testing if I'd understand. I told him about Uncle Rick, about the strip poker, about testifying without actually testifying because of the plea deal, about watching someone admit guilt and get 8 years. Lucas nodded slowly, his expression changing to recognition and something like relief. My case is still going to trial. I have to testify in 3 months. The teacher's fighting the charges, saying everything was misinterpreted. I'm terrified of the courtroom, of being cross-examined, of people not believing me. We became close after that, bonded over the specific trauma of being kids who'd reported predators and watched the legal system process it in slow motion. Lucas testified in January of our sophomore year, spent 2 days on the stand being cross-examined by a defense attorney who tried to suggest he'd misunderstood innocent touches, that he'd fabricated allegations because of bad grades. I sat in the courthouse hallway during Lucas's testimony, waiting even though I couldn't go into the courtroom. When he came out after the first day, he looked wrecked, pale and shaking. The lawyer made it sound like I wanted it, like I encouraged it. Made me repeat details over and over. I felt like I was the one on trial. The teacher was convicted, got 18 years. Lucas texted me from the courthouse after the verdict. 18 years. Still not enough, but more than your guy got. I'm sorry the system failed you worse. I wasn't jealous exactly, but I felt the unfairness sharply. Why did some predators get decades while others got deals and lighter sentences? Why did some victims have to endure cross-examination while others were spared? Why wasn't there any consistency in how these cases were handled? Junior year, I started volunteering with a youth advocacy organization that supported kids going through legal cases involving abuse. I figured if I couldn't change what happened to me, I could help others navigate the system. The coordinator, a woman named Ms. Brennan, had been a victim advocate for 30 years. She trained me to sit with kids before court appearances, to explain legal processes in language they could understand, to remind them that none of it was their fault. The first kid I worked with was a 10-year-old boy whose coach had been inappropriate with him during private training sessions. The boy was terrified to tell his story to investigators, convinced no one would believe him because the coach was popular and successful. I told him about Uncle Rick, about the poker games, about how hard it was to tell but how much worse it would have been to stay silent. He testified. The coach was arrested, and 3 other families came forward after seeing the news coverage, saying their sons had mentioned uncomfortable situations, but they'd dismissed it as misunderstanding. The coach pleaded guilty to avoid trial, got 12 years. The boy's mother called me afterward crying, thanking me for helping her son find his voice. That phone call did something for me, shifted something that had been stuck. Maybe I couldn't get justice exactly the way I wanted it, but I could help create it for others. Senior year, Danny reached out via Facebook message. He was at a different high school, doing okay, seeing a therapist regularly. He said he thought about that night in the basement all the time, wondered what would have happened if I hadn't reported it, how much further Uncle Rick would have gone. He would have escalated. My therapist says that's what predators do. They test boundaries, then push further each time. If you hadn't stopped it when you did, I don't know where it would have ended. I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to speak up when I couldn't. We met for coffee, the first time I'd seen him in person in almost 4 years. He looked different. Older, obviously, but also more solid somehow, less fragile. We talked carefully at first, dancing around the subject, then finally addressed it directly. Danny told me about the therapy, about learning that what happened wasn't his fault, that children can't consent to exploitation even if they don't explicitly say no. He told me about the nightmares that still came sometimes, about the triggers he'd learned to manage, about the anger he'd worked through at his family for not protecting him. I told him about the advocacy work, about helping other kids, about how transforming the trauma into something useful had helped me process it. We talked for 3 hours in that coffee shop, both of us crying at different points, both of us laughing at other points, both of us gradually lifting weight we'd been carrying separately. Before we left, Danny said something that stuck with me. I used to think you reporting it meant you didn't trust me to handle it myself, like you thought I was weak. But I understand now that I was weak in that moment, and that's okay. I was a kid being manipulated by an adult. You saw I needed help and got it for me. That's what friendship is. We stayed in touch after that, not constant contact, but regular check-ins, text messages on hard days, meeting up during college breaks. The friendship that had fractured under trauma pressure had healed into something different, but still real. I went to college and studied criminal justice, focusing on child advocacy and victim services. Lucas went into psychology, wanting to understand trauma and help survivors process it. We stayed close throughout college, both of us building careers around preventing what happened to us from happening to others. During my junior year internship with the county prosecutor's office, I sat in on interviews with child victims, watched detectives build cases, learned how often abuse went unreported because children didn't know how to articulate what was happening or didn't think anyone would believe them. I learned that most child predators were known to their victims, family members, or trusted community figures, people in positions of authority who exploited that trust systematically. People exactly like Uncle Rick. One case particularly haunted me. An 11-year-old girl had tried to tell her mother that her stepfather was touching her inappropriately during bath time, even though she was old enough to bathe herself. The mother accused the girl of lying, of trying to break up the marriage, of being jealous of the new family dynamic. The abuse continued for 2 more years until the girl told a teacher, who reported it immediately. By then, the stepfather had also started abusing the girl's younger sister. 1 report dismissed, 2 children suffering years of abuse as a result. The prosecutor on that case, a stern woman named Catherine Mills, took me aside after a particularly difficult hearing. This work will destroy you if you let it. You'll see the worst of humanity repeatedly. You'll wonder how people can hurt children they're supposed to protect. But you'll also see incredible resilience. You'll see kids who survive and rebuild and refuse to let abuse define them. You'll help put predators in prison where they can't hurt anyone else. That's worth the heartbreak. I thought about Uncle Rick in prison, about Danny in therapy rebuilding his life, about all the boys Uncle Rick had groomed who were now adults processing their trauma. Catherine was right. After graduation, I was hired by the same prosecutor's office as a victim advocate. My job was supporting child victims through the legal process, explaining courtroom procedures in language they understood, sitting with them during testimony, connecting them with resources. It was devastating work and meaningful work in equal measure. Every case brought me back to that basement, to that moment when Uncle Rick revealed his intentions and we all felt powerless. Now I had power. Now I could use my knowledge and experience to protect kids who were where I'd been. One case during my first year nearly broke me. A 12-year-old boy whose soccer coach had been grooming him with special attention, extra practice time, gifts, gradually escalating to inappropriate touching. The boy was terrified to testify, convinced no one would believe him because the coach was beloved in the community, had won championships, had coached kids who went on to play college soccer. I sat with him in a conference room before his testimony, told him about Uncle Rick, about the poker games, about how monsters wear masks of respectability, told him his testimony mattered, that speaking truth to power was the bravest thing anyone could do. He testified. His voice shook, but he told his story clearly, detailed every boundary violation, every inappropriate touch, every time the coach had said, "This is our secret or you're special," not like the other boys. The defense attorney tried to discredit him, suggested he'd misinterpreted friendly coaching, that he was seeking attention, but the boy held firm. The coach was convicted on multiple counts, got 22 years. After the verdict, 4 other families came forward saying their sons had mentioned uncomfortable situations with the coach, but they'd dismissed it as normal sports culture, roughhousing in locker rooms, typical male bonding. The boys' testimony had given them permission to believe their children. 1 report, 1 brave kid, multiple other victims validated, and a predator stopped. During my second year as an advocate, Danny finished his psychology doctorate and opened a private practice specializing in trauma, particularly childhood sexual abuse. He called me when he hung his shingle, his voice filled with exhausted pride. I'm doing it. Taking the worst thing that ever happened to me and using it to help people. Uncle Rick tried to destroy me, but I'm still here, still fighting, and now I'm the one with power. We met for dinner to celebrate. First time we'd seen each other in over a year. Danny looked good, healthy, settled in a way he hadn't been in high school. We talked about our work, about the clients and cases that kept us awake at night, about the small victories that made the heartbreak worthwhile. Then, Danny said something that shifted everything. I used to be angry at you for reporting Uncle Rick. Not rationally, but emotionally. Part of me blamed you for the divorce, for changing schools, for all the chaos that followed. But I've worked through that in therapy. The chaos wasn't your fault. It was his fault for abusing us, and my parents' fault for not protecting me. You were just a kid trying to help another kid. You saved me and probably dozens of others he would have targeted. I need you to know I'm grateful. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight. I'd been carrying guilt about the aftermath for years, wondering if reporting had caused more harm than good, if staying silent would have spared Danny the trauma of investigation and family implosion. His words released me from that. We stayed at that restaurant for 4 hours, processing years of trauma and guilt and anger together, both of us crying at points, but cathartic crying, the kind that releases poison. Danny told me Uncle Rick had tried to contact him from prison multiple times, writing letters claiming he loved him and missed him, trying to manipulate even from behind bars. Danny had returned every letter unopened. He doesn't get my forgiveness or my energy. He doesn't get closure. He can sit in that cell knowing his nephew wants nothing to do with him, that his whole family disowned him, that his name is synonymous with predator. That's his consequence. I asked if he'd ever want to confront Uncle Rick face to face, tell him directly what he'd done. Danny shook his head firmly. He's not worth my time. I spent years in therapy unpacking what he did to me. I don't need his acknowledgement or apology to heal. My healing isn't dependent on him at all. I'm moving forward without giving him any more of my life. That conversation fundamentally changed how I approached my advocacy work. I stopped seeing victims as broken people who needed fixing and started seeing them as survivors who were already strong, who just needed support and resources to access that strength. Danny and I started collaborating, me referring clients to him for therapy, him referring families to me for legal advocacy. We developed a program pairing child victims going through legal cases with adult survivors who could mentor them, show them that healing was possible, that life continued after trauma. Danny was one of the first volunteer mentors, watching him sit with terrified 12 and 13-year-olds and tell them, "I survived this, and you will too. You're stronger than you know," was powerful beyond measure. The program expanded rapidly. We trained 50 mentors in the first year, all adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse who'd done their own therapeutic work and wanted to give back. We supported over 200 child victims through investigations and trials in our county alone. The conviction rate for child abuse cases went up 19% because victims felt supported enough to testify, confident enough to withstand cross-examination. The program won a state award for innovation in victim services. We were interviewed by national media, asked to present at conferences, invited to help other counties develop similar programs. But the best part wasn't the recognition. It was the letters we received from survivors years later, thanking us for helping them when they felt most alone, telling us they'd gone to college, started careers, built healthy relationships, that they'd transformed their trauma into purpose, just as we had. When I turned 28, I got a letter forwarded from the prison system. Uncle Rick had somehow obtained my current address through public records from his trial. The envelope made me nauseous, sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I could open it. Inside was a handwritten note on prison stationery, his handwriting still neat and controlled. "I've been doing extensive thinking about my actions and the people I hurt. I want you to know I'm sorry for my behavior that night. I was going through personal difficulties and made poor decisions. I've completed therapy programs here and understand now that my actions were inappropriate. I hope you can forgive me and have moved forward with your life successfully." The casual tone, the minimization, made rage flood through me. My behavior instead of systematic grooming and abuse, poor decisions instead of calculated predation, made you uncomfortable instead of exploited and violated you. The letter was manipulation, an attempt to make me absolve him so he could feel better about himself, maybe help his parole case. I called Danny immediately. He laughed bitterly when I read it to him. He sent me basically the same letter 2 years ago, like saying sorry for poor choices erases trauma and destroys lives, like we're supposed to give him peace of mind. Narcissists never actually change, they just learn new manipulation tactics. We decided to respond together, one letter signed by both of us. We kept it brief and devastating. "We received your letters. We do not forgive you, and we never will. Your crimes weren't poor choices or mistakes. They were calculated, systematic abuse of children you were supposed to protect. You don't get to feel better. You don't get closure or peace. You destroyed childhoods and created trauma that will echo through entire lives. The consequences of those actions are yours to bear alone. We have moved forward with our lives, built careers around preventing what you did from happening to other children, transformed our pain into purpose. We healed despite you, not because of anything you've done. Do not contact either of us again." We sent copies to his prison counselor, and the warden requested that any future correspondence be blocked. We never heard from him again. Years passed quickly after that. I became director of victim services for the county, overseeing advocates and developing programs. Danny's practice expanded to 3 locations with 20 therapists, all specializing in trauma. We spoke at conferences together about childhood sexual abuse, grooming tactics, healing processes, systematic failures in protection. We wrote articles for professional journals. We testified before state legislators about improving child protection laws, mandatory reporting requirements, funding for victim services. We lived full lives that weren't defined by what Uncle Rick had done, even though that trauma remained part of our stories. I met someone, fell in love, got married. My wife knew my history from early in our relationship and never treated me as damaged or fragile. We had a son, and I was hypervigilant in ways my own parents hadn't been. Maybe overprotective, but determinedly so. I taught him body autonomy before he could walk properly. Taught him correct anatomical terms so he could report inappropriate touch clearly. Taught him that no one, not even family, could touch him without permission. Taught him to trust his instincts, to say no loudly, to tell me immediately if any adult made him uncomfortable. Maybe I projected my trauma onto his childhood, but he would never experience what I had. I'd make absolutely certain of it. When I turned 35, the parole board contacted me. Uncle Rick was eligible for parole after serving 8 years, time reduced for good behavior. They asked if I wanted to submit a victim impact statement or appear at the hearing. I wrote a detailed statement describing the long-term impacts of his abuse, the years of therapy, the ways his actions had shaped my entire life and career. I appeared at the hearing via video conference. Uncle Rick sat at a table looking older, grayer, diminished. He'd gained weight in prison, looked nothing like the smooth-talking casino dealer who'd groomed us. His lawyer made a presentation about his rehabilitation, the programs he'd completed, his plans for reintegration. Then I spoke. I detailed everything. The initial grooming comment that everyone laughed at. The strip poker game where he systematically exploited our discomfort and desire to seem mature. The manipulation tactics, the normalization language, the way he'd made us complicit in our own abuse. I described the investigation, the other victims discovered, the online networks, the photographs. I detailed the years of therapy, the trust issues, the hypervigilance, the ways his actions had shaped my understanding of safety and authority. I ended with this. This man is a calculated predator who spent years perfecting his grooming techniques. He has shown no genuine remorse, only manipulation. Releasing him puts children at risk. He should serve his full sentence and then be monitored extensively. He has forfeited the right to freedom. The parole board deliberated for 2 days. They denied parole, cited ongoing risk to community, lack of genuine remorse despite therapeutic programs. He'd be eligible again in 3 years. I'd testify again in 3 years, and again after that if necessary. Danny testified at the same hearing via video from his office. His testimony was clinical, devastating. He detailed the psychological impacts of grooming, the ways predators select and manipulate victims, the long-term trauma even from non-contact abuse. He ended with, "My uncle destroyed my childhood and fractured my family. He showed me that trusted adults could be dangerous, that my instincts were correct even when everyone dismissed them. He should remain incarcerated for the full sentence." When the denial came through, we met for coffee to celebrate grimly. Not really a celebration, more an acknowledgement that we'd prevented him from getting early release, that we'd continue fighting every time he came up for parole until his full sentence was served. We were both in our mid-30s now, had been carrying this for over 20 years. The grief and anger had transformed into something else over time, something more like determination and purpose. Uncle Rick would die in prison or spend his last years under intensive supervision. Either way, he'd lost. We'd won by surviving, by healing, by building lives and careers around protecting children. His legacy was shame and imprisonment. Our legacy was the hundreds of children we'd helped, the policies we'd influenced, the predators we'd helped convict, the survivors we'd supported through their darkest moments. On what would have been the 25th anniversary of that first poker game, Danny and I drove back to his old neighborhood. The house where it happened had been sold years ago, occupied now by a different family, with a swing set in the yard and bicycles on the porch. Normal family chaos, no hint of the abuse that had unfolded in that basement decades ago. We sat in the car across the street, both quiet. Finally, Danny said, "If you could go back to that night, knowing everything now, what would you do differently?" I thought about it carefully. I'd walk out immediately when he suggested strip poker. I'd tell your mom right then what he'd said. I'd call my parents to pick me up and insist on reporting it. But 12-year-old me didn't have the knowledge or courage that 35-year-old me has. I did the best I could with what I knew then. We both did. Danny nodded slowly. I used to torture myself with that question. All the what-ifs. What if I'd told my mom earlier? What if I'd never invited you over? What if I'd refused the first time? But my therapist helped me understand that the only person responsible is him. He was the adult. He had all the power. We were kids trying to survive an impossible situation. We sat there as the sun set. 2 survivors who'd transformed. Trauma into purpose, who'd refused to let a predator's actions define the entirety of our lives. We'd been broken and we'd healed, not perfectly, but sufficiently. We both still had scars, still had triggers, still had moments when the past overwhelmed the present. But we were here. We were fighting. We were making sure that comment about strip poker, that basement game, wasn't the end of our stories but the beginning of something else. The beginning of advocacy and protection for children who needed voices. Uncle Rick was released after serving his full 8-year sentence, spent the next 7 years under intensive supervision, registered sex offender, restricted from any contact with minors, monitored constantly. He died at 62, heart attack in the apartment where he lived alone, no family contact, no friends, his name forever linked to child abuse. We were notified of his death by victim services. Neither of us attended his funeral. There was nothing to mourn, no closure needed. He'd been dead to us long before his body stopped functioning. What mattered was the work we'd built, the lives we'd touched, the children we'd protected. That was our legacy. His legacy was being remembered only as a predator, his name spoken with disgust, his actions used in training materials as examples of grooming tactics. He got exactly what he deserved. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.